right, so this is Josiah Bola Hilaire, and this is the data Gianni Grippo. Oh my God, CLA, constraint led approach, ecological. The shit is awesome. The shit is awesome. Gianni Grippo is mine, was mine, always will be mine forever. Look at that. Look at that. Look. Are you people who say you can't wrestle? Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. That's mines. That's mines. Look at that. All of that, head to toe. All of that is mines. Look at that. Look at Gianni. Look at that. Look at him saving the day. Look. Oh my God. 23 years. He's still kicking ass. Look at that. Look at that. Look. That's my alligator. That's the Italian demon. Look at that. Look at that. Look at his arm. Look. That's all of that is mine. I got custody of that. Look at that. Look at Gianni. Look at him showing a master class. Look. Constraint led approach. Look at that. Look. Oh my God. Look, read the post. Read it, y'all. Look, this man saving lives. Look at that. That's minds, okay? M-I-N-E-Z. Z is the last letter. Z is the final chapter. I claims all of that. I got all of that. Look at that. Look at that. Wait, go to Bodega Jiu-Jitsu if you're in New Jersey, y'all. You finna see Kevon. You finna see Vanessa. You finna see Gianni Grippo. You finna see him teach. You finna see him save lives. You finna see him problem solve. Yo. Constraint-led approach. Greg Souders, I respect you. DeAndre Corby, I respect you. Gavin Corby, I respect you. Ecological is here. Look at that. Look at that. Look. Look. Oh my God. Look. Oh my God. Ooh. Gianni, why can't you do that to me, bro? Oh, you just throw me to the ground. You just throw me like a pinata. I will pinata. Like, you just throw me out to the ground like, oh my God. Look at that. Oh my God. All of that is mine. Okay, look. Oh my God, look at him keep on. Look at him. Look at the train again. Look at that. Look. Oh my God, this is the Italian demon. That's my alligator, Gianni Grippo. Look at that. The Jiu-Jitsu prince. Oh my God, the data. Oh my God, look at him. The data. Look. All of that is mine. Okay, all right. I said what I said.